Good. Where's your sister? Oh, okay. Hello.
Ready when you are.
Thank you, everyone. I'm calling this meeting on the Rent Stabilization Board. It is August 15th, and I'm calling this meeting to order. I want to say that we had a closed-door meeting and no action was taken. So, Amy?
You can't hear anything?
Commissioner Alpert,
Present.
Chang,
Here. Ooh, this is not good.
Poblet. Give me 1 second, I'm just going to adjust the volume. Okay, hopefully that's a bit better. Solosky.
Present.
Simon Weisberg,
Here? Here?
Soto Hill,
Yes.
Tregub,
Present.
Laverde.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to mention that I would like to apologize to the public, to the Rent Board commissioners who were here last month. It is very embarrassing that we, for the first time in probably 20 years, this board did not have a quorum. I want to remind all commissioners that it's a responsibility to not only show up on time, but to be present at meetings because they are elected officials, and that is what your job is, to not only be showing up to your meetings on time. And I'm not going to say I have been late, I admit that, but to show up especially on time and to the Rent Board meeting. There's no reason why we should not have quorum. So thank you very much. Okay. Our next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda for today, for June, and for April. So do we need to take these separately?
This is just the approval of the agenda, not the minutes. So
Oh, okay,
we're just on
thank you,
items here.
thank you. So let's
Sure.
do the approval of the agenda.
I'll move the agenda.
Do we have a second?
I assume somebody's going to want to move something around.
Yes.
Commissioner Tregub?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to propose, first of all, with the appreciation to the work of the AGA Registration Committee and staff. I think this is an excellent recommendation. I'd love to see if we can move item 6A1 to consent. That's discussion and possible action regarding proposed amendment to Regulation 503, definition of principal residence. If there are no objections.
No objections.
And I'd also like to see if we can move 6A3 to consent, discussion and possible action regarding proposed amendments to streamline various Rent Board regulations. I just wanted to ask staff, I noticed that in a couple of places, maybe just one, I didn't see the revised date. Most of them had it, but a few did not. So I think that's an administrative fix.
Yeah, we'll adjust that and make sure that after the second reading, that it reflects the accurate date that the amendments were adopted.
Okay. And then I just wanted to see if we can adjourn the meeting in memory of Molly Hazen, who was an El Cerrito resident, but left an indelible, remarkable place in our community. And in the memory of all the victims of the tragic shootings that we have unfortunately had over the last few weeks.
Commissioner Chang?
Thank you. Can I add one more person too? Can I add Donald Lee Warren? He was a former South Berkeley resident.
Excuse me, who?
Donald Lee Warren. Donald. Oh, here's a picture, since I have the camera on.
Okay. Commissioner Sotovihil?
If it's not too difficult to add 6A4 also to the consent calendar, do we need to discuss staffing model? Great.
Oh, 6A4, yes, absolutely. Well, I think you made the motion, but I'm happy to suggest we move that to consent.
I'll accept those, but I just want to clarify. 6A1, 3, and 4, is that
Correct.
correct? And I agree with 4. Yes, yeah.
And for the record, 6A4 is recommendation to adopt proposed changes to the Rent Board staffing model.
Chair, just one question. Commissioner Treywood, could you spell Molly Hazen's last name for me, please?
Yes, Hazen, and it's a different spelling for her first name. It ends with an IE.
Thank you. So adjourning the meeting in memory of Molly Hazen, all of the victims of the recent tragic shootings in the United States, and Donald Lee Warren, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Got it. So Commissioner Treygood, were you seconding that motion?
Sure, I'm happy to second.
Okay, so,
So everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No, so motion is moved?
motion carries.
Carries, thank you. Okay, so now we go to public forum. Does anyone, do we have any speakers? I don't have any cards. Would anyone in the audience like to speak? Okay. Can you come up?
I'd like to reserve my speech, if you will, my written letter, until my matter comes up, which is apparently E. I got
Are-
3 days' notice on this, so I'm rather,
Are you on the appeal?
This is a consent item that he's here to address.
so
Which-
I'll reserve my.
Now is the only time to address it, if the board wants to hear anything.
Everything is so controlled, everything about this, and
No,
it's
why don't you just
not
fill out the
justice.
card, and then you have your 3 minutes to speak.
My petition is the subject of.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
All right. My petition is letter E. I just got notice of this 3 days ago, so I'm rather less prepared than I would have liked to have been. And I'm apparently going to be limited to what I can say based on the time limits that you put. That has very little to do with justice. I'm going to read my letter until you cut me off. A reasonable, fair, and impartial trier of fact and truth would reasonably recognize that my basis for appeal has merit and that there was not one but two decisions contained in this commingled petition which created confusion to me. That RWN 1621 was for a rooming house decision, while the rent board legal staff and executive director have all but ignored and steamrolled through the other side of the decision, that being my owner occupancy of the subject unit. So I have attempted to clarify this confusion and demand full and complete due process without the interruption and influence of the executive director and legal staff, but that seems impossible. Please take note that there is going to be no reference to my letter of opposition to this summary dismissal of my appeal without any input or opposition by me other than this moment. The question must be asked. If I, as appellant, can reasonably establish that there exists and continues to exist a basis to pursue this appeal of my owner occupancy and that the hearings examiner decision was fatally flawed and biased, then I am that I am not a sham, nor my situation is a sham operation, and that my character, my reputation, my credibility have been poisoned and destroyed in the process, then I should be entitled to further pursue this appeal. I have repeatedly asked under what authority, rule, regulation, law does this legal staff exercise to derail and terminate my appeal? That question remains unanswered, and as does so many other questions of accountability of rent board staff. They do not answer questions putting themselves on the hot seat. They refuse to answer those questions of accountability, and I'm deeply offended by it, sirs. All remains unanswered. In other words, there is zero accountability, abusive process, and now apparently a denial of access to my due process rights. And why is Mr. Kalecki and Mr. Brown going to such great effort to prevent this appeal from going to its full process? The justifications in the whereases and wherefores are a smokescreen to misdirect away from the underlying truth. He has initiated this Rent Board Commission proposed resolution to enlist your stamp of approval to this misdirection that is being perpetrated. By doing so, he attempts to avoid himself as the individual of accountability. He'll put that on you folks. I have much more, but
Sure, go ahead.
perhaps it is because I have requested disqualification of the Rent Board Commissioners as a biased tenants board, as described by Judy Hunt in the newspaper. The hearings examiner decision was not based on any facts. his bias and prejudice. I requested disqualification. My request was denied. I requested to subpoena the rent board investigator to testify. Denied. Perhaps what's happening is that the procedural path to my owner occupancy is disfavored as a legitimate scenario, and therefore they're using an end around to circumvent the legitimacy of my owner occupancy. The rent board should not be entrusted with bringing fair and impartial justice. Rent board justice is a distant change from true and honest justice. This petition and likely this appeal will find its way into a true court of law. Mr. Kalekian will be held accountable. Your call to decide the extent of your level of fairness and impartiality is at stake here. I suggest the rent board needs a new executive director, one that advocates fair and balance for both tenants and landlords. As it stands, the executive director and legal staff can influence and manipulate these petitions and appeals to achieve any result they want. Rent board justice can often be and is often manipulated at will. My scenario reeks of impropriety throughout. The entire process, having little or no accountability, reeks of impropriety and demonstrates why the rent board should not be entrusted with fair and impartial justice. At every juncture, every event, the rent board staff has directed, shaped, defined, limited, misinterpreted the petition hearing, refused to be in any way accountable for that decision, then took an avenue to derail this appeal without any follow-up or feedback from me, then ignore or override my opposition by letter to the summary termination. This is a denial of due process, despite all my objections. And why have I appealed, and why do I stand here tonight? Is it because there's nothing at issue, nothing to address? My reputation, my credibility, my good name, my operation of my business in terms of reasonability is at stake. And I can't even represent myself because they're trying to terminate it without my opportunity to defend myself. They're effectively calling me a crook and disallowing me to challenge this injustice. It is a blatant demonstration of the arbitrary handling of these sarcastically described petitions of justice. And to someone who is measurably intelligent, educated, legally proficient in law, this is a process without any accountability and any rules of conduct and interpretation. It is offensive and disgusting. It is not justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marwitz. Okay. So now we are going to go to our consent items. Does anyone want to speak on any of the consent items? Commissioner Trego?
Thank you. So on the consent item 4D, recommendation to transmit a communication to U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, expressing opposition to the proposed changes to the implementation of Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980. I wanted to see with approval of the board if this letter that we would be transmitting to HUD could be co-signed by all of us who are present tonight.
Is that a motion?
Yes. I move the consent calendar with that proviso to 4D.
I'll be happy to second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No? Okay. Does that motion pass? Amy?
It does. So just to clarify, Commissioner, you're removing all the consent items as well as the action items that we previously agreed to move to consent with the provision that all the commissioners present would agree to sign the letter to HUD. Yes?
Correct. And I guess we would need to find a hard copy of that letter so that we can all pass it around and sign it.
This evening?
Or maybe you can just have our names, maybe just have our names on it, and then it's signed by the chair.
That sounds good.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Let's do that. Thanks.
Thank you.
I do have a question because I know we still have, I believe, the April minutes that have never been approved. Was
Yeah,
it?
but they were one of the consent items, so
Yes.
if I understood Commissioner Tragub's motion, all of those items, including both sets of minutes,
Yes, that
as
was
well
the
as the
intent.
action items have been, or will be approved by this vote. So this
Yes.
is moved by Tragub, seconded by Chair Laverde.
Yes.
So,
And we've all voted on it in favor, so,
motion carries.
okay, great. Okay, so now let's go to, so we can't hear or appeal till 8 o'clock, so let's go to our action items now? Am I missing anything? Yes, so we'll go to action item number 6.2, and it's this discussion and possible action concerning the selection appointment to fill the vacancy in the rent board. So, let me go. So, let me see, let me move back over here. So as we are aware that we have oh, let me find it. I can't find it. Sorry about this. So I'm just trying to find our letter that we were sending. So it's at 6.2, that's what it is, I'm missing that. 6.2. Oh, here it is. So, so what we're doing is, so under the charter, the board must select a replacement to complete the time remaining through November 30th, 2020 on the rent board for Commissioner Christina Murphy's term. Any person appointed to the board must be a resident of Berkeley and a registered voter. On June 20th, 2019, the board approved by consent a motion to establish an ad hoc committee to develop the recommendations for a process to select and vote on a proposed interim commissioner. The ad hoc committee met on July 9th and recommends the following process. Okay. So we're recommending that on August 16th, which is tomorrow, the staff will issue a press release and post on the rent board's website an announcement concerning the vacancy, and the board is considering interested qualified candidates. The announcement will outline for the community the process adopted by the board, including submission deadlines, notice that the information submitted is a public document, and an explanation of how to submit appropriate information in order to be considered. Between August 16th and 5 p.m. on September 27, 2019, any interested and legally eligible members of the community may submit an appropriate information to the executive director or designated staff indicating interest in being considered as a candidate to fill the vacant seat. Staff will forward all information received from interested members of the community to all board members' emails within 1 business day of receipts. And then the ad hoc committee members will review application materials and, as a group, meet with candidates beginning in late September. Each committee member may submit individual reflections by 5 p.m. on October 7th to be included in the agenda packet for the October 17th meeting. The board will vote and select a replacement to fill Commissioner Murphy's seat at the October 17th regular board meeting. And then we have listed the process we recommended the board follow in selecting the candidates reviewed by the ad hoc committee. Do you want me to continue reading this? Okay. The recommended process for selecting the candidates reviewed by the ad hoc committee. When choosing among several candidates for a single position, many candidates may be acceptable. Candidates who are voted on first have an advantage, so one with a bare majority who is voted on first would be selected over another who has a stronger support. To avoid this situation and vote first on the candidate with the strongest overall support, the ad hoc committee recommends that the following process be conducted on the September 19th board meeting. After reading the application material of each candidate and, if applicable, the reports from individual members of the ad hoc committee, board members can ask the committee members questions for clarification purposes. 2, all candidates that are present, even those who do not submit a timely application, shall have the opportunity to present themselves on the board in 3 minutes or less. Board members may ask questions of any of the candidates. Staff comment. The board this evening should determine how the order in which the candidates make their presentation will be determined. Okay? Board members will discuss who to select. They may ask additional questions of the candidates if necessary. Upon conclusion of the discussion among board members and questioning of candidates, the board will hold an open straw poll to determine the candidates with the strongest support. The candidate with the strongest support will be voted upon first, so that no board member has a positional advantage. Each member will write down their first and/or second choices in order on a slip of paper with the voting commissioner's name at the top. Staff will then collect and read the name of the member and their selections and tabulate the votes. The straw poll will determine the straw poll will determine the order in which candidates are voted on by the full board, but not be considered the final vote or action by the board. A, the candidate with the greatest total votes, combined first and second votes, in the straw poll will be the first person for the board to formally consider and vote on. Any candidate who does not receive any first or second place votes will be eliminated from consideration. If any candidates have the same total votes, combined first and second place votes, the candidate with more first place votes will be voted on ahead of the other candidate. If any candidates tie both in first and second place totals, the candidates who come first alphabetically by last name will be candidates the board will vote on first. B, if that individual is not selected by the formal board, the candidate with the next greatest number of combined first and second place votes will be voted on second, and so forth. If no candidate with first or second place votes receives 5 votes during the direct voting by the full board, the candidate among these who receives the fewest votes will be eliminated, and we will begin the process again with a new straw poll of the remaining candidates. This process will continue until a candidate receives at least 5 votes. If no candidates receive 5 votes, the chair will open the floor for new nominations or other motions. Any questions? Commissioner Sotovejil.
It's not necessarily a comment, rather it's an amendment. Are we ready for that? It's a slight little amendment. It's on 4A in terms of, or 4A, the last sentence, talking about if there's candidates tied with first and second place totals, the first alphabetical by last name. Now, my last name is Sotovejil, and based on European indoctrination of our society, I've gotten that name. And so I don't think I should be penalized further based on something like that, or anybody else. And so I think we should do a coin flip. When you're in Little League and you do All-Stars, you show up to the field and you flip a coin because that's fair. And I think that we should equally do something similar to a 50-50 as opposed to your birth name. So that's my amendment to this proposal. Otherwise, it looks great. Can I get a second on that?
Can you,
Sure, I'll second it.
Thank you.
can you just tell me the section so I can read it?
4A, the last sentence.
4A, last sentence. That's fine.
So Commissioner Trego, Solosky.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm processing that. I'm trying to figure out, okay, who does the coin flip? Our chair? Executive director? I think, and whose coin do we use? I'm just kind of mulling this over and figuring out procedurally, if we have to use this, how is it going to work? And is it any better than alphabetical? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, in a way, from my point of view. But I understand your concern. I'm Solosky, so I would be at the end also, right? But leaving that aside, do we really need to mess with this? Because it raises some issues about who's going to do it, how it's going to be done, et cetera, et cetera.
Commissioner Chang.
So why don't we just make it simple and say when it comes last alphabetically by last name will be the candidate will vote on first. Does that work for you?
What?
If we do it
One
by
more time?
last name? So if we say if any candidates tie both and first, second place totals, the candidate who comes last alphabetically by last name will be the candidate the board will vote on first.
No, because
Does
that's
that work for
equally
you?
unfair.
I would second that.
What?
I would accept that.
So I
that
guess
change.
that's my,
Isn't that the reverse of what?
Kind of the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing.
You know,
And we can easily have
done.
a chair or the executive director flip a coin. It's not that difficult. And if we're reversing it, it's not logical. I don't know why you would make, anyway, I make a motion to support the overall proposal with the modification of a coin flip by the chairperson if the first and second place votes are equal with two candidates.
Commissioner
Very simple.
Traeger.
Oh, I, like my colleague, Commissioner Solosky, it took me some time to mull this over, but there are organizational bylaws that do allow for coin flips in the event of a tie. So I think this would be consistent. I think it should be the executive director or his staff designee if he's not available for whatever reason. That way it takes it out of our hands and gives it to staff that would be impartial. So I would support that with that change, and I hope whatever we decide, we can decide quickly and move on to other business we need to conduct.
so are you friendly to that motion?
No, because,
No, to his not substitute, for his amendment to your motion.
so right now I made a motion, right? Because I failed to make a
Oh,
motion
I'll
at the
second.
beginning. Thank you.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
It was already seconded.
Yeah, by me. So I'll withdraw my.
Right, but my point was I never
Hold on,
actually made a motion.
You weren't recognized, Commissioner. One
So
second.
I'm
I will
clarifying.
withdraw my substitute motion, assuming the fact that we can go for a vote. If Commissioner Traeger wants to be the seconder, you can.
Oh, I'm happy for you to be the
Microphone,
Okay, so I'll
please.
be the seconder, and so I'm ready to vote on your motion, Commissioner Sotomayor. I just wanted to clarify that you're okay with Commissioner Traeger's comments about letting the executive director. be
Absolutely.
in that role. So, okay.
or
Thank you.
designee.
Actually, I'm going to need clarification on the motion before we vote.
So can you please clarify your motion, Commissioner Sotomayor?
Very simple. I support the proposal as written with the exception of modifying 4A last sentence, which you could write it however you want. In essence, it's if there's a tie with first and second votes, rather than alphabetized, it is going to be a coin flip by executive director or staff to determine who goes first. And we can bring by Mexican Libertad if we want. It doesn't matter what coin.
Okay, previously you said coin flip by the chair, so you're correcting it to executive director or staff?
Yes, the amendment or the friendly,
Yeah, by the executive director or his staff designee.
Designee, got it. Okay.
So,
Okay, so we should take a vote. Oh, go ahead. Commissioner Alpert and then Commissioner Chang.
This is a motion to adopt with that change or to amend?
adopt that.
Okay, so before we adopt, I have a question.
Go ahead.
With regards to 4A, if the members of the subcommittee could just explain the rationale for total votes rather than first place votes. So why we're going with most total votes, including first and second, rather than most first place votes.
I'll take a stab at it.
One more time, can you repeat your
Yeah,
question?
so
one more time?
basically, so 4A says the candidate with the greatest total votes, combined first and second place votes, in a straw poll will be the first person the board considers. So my question is why we're using first and second place and not just looking at first place, whoever gets the most first place votes.
Jay, do you want to do this? It looks like you're excited.
You got to turn on.
Oh,
Last month, when we distributed something, there was a whole discussion about any number of folks can get 5 votes because they're acceptable. So what we're trying to do is, by the most total votes, it would be closer to a consensus candidate. So the board wouldn't be forced to vote on somebody who maybe got the most first place votes, 3, and the next person got 2, but the other person had 7 total votes and the other person only had 3 or 4. So it was tilting toward consensus rather than first place. Because ultimately, you have to get 5 affirmative votes from the board. You could do it either way, though.
Commissioner Hart.
My reason for asking is I imagine a scenario where one applicant gets, say, there'll be 8 of us voting, so one applicant gets, 5 first place votes. One applicant gets 3 first place votes, and then another applicant gets 8 second place votes. Right, so they were no one's first choice, but there was one candidate who was 5 people's second choice who would vote on the. At the end of the day, I don't have strong feelings because we'll be able to vote yes or no on that applicant anyway. It's not the final vote, but I do imagine a scenario where someone who is everyone's second place but no one's first place could be voted on before someone who has a clear majority of first place votes.
Commissioner Chan.
Yeah, so I'm going to change the conversation. Well, I'm going to change the conversation. So I just want to make sure, so we had a problem with this the last time around, and I just want to make sure in regards to the Brown Act, people have public forums. So in this committee meeting, which is a public meeting, people who are the commissioners on the board can express themselves in whichever way. Privately speaking, I want to make sure that they have their own, they can speak to 4 people regardless of who's on the board. And I just want to make sure we clarify that going into this because I know there was a lot of confusion and I want to make sure that going forward that, people on the committee, because I don't sit on the committee, they can talk to me without, it being a violation of the Brown Act.
Becomes a little bit more difficult because you have a committee of 4 that it's going to be vetting folks and talking to them as a collective ad hoc body. So encouraging them to speak with other commissioners not on that committee is a slippery slope and might be promoting some dangerous ground as far as violations.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to ask is if this so I just want to make sure, is this ad hoc committee an executive session when they interview the candidates?
I'm not sure what you mean by an executive session.
Meaning by
but it's a
it's in a
collection of
closed
4
room.
board members, and if you have one
Yes.
other person speaking to them and that person relays what the other 4 said, then you've got a potential violation.
Yes, but it's a public meeting in which the public will be able to see what every single commissioner has said in a public meeting. And
Not
I just
necessarily.
wanted to make sure. So I just want to, so what I'm trying to clarify is in regards to whether it's the interview or any parts of the meeting, there will be parts in which it's closed to the public?
The board can choose to hold it open or closed. The Brown Act does not require the same notice requirements for ad hoc committees as it does for committees with continuing subject matter jurisdiction.
Oh, so you're saying that the ad hoc committee can meet, let's say, without the 72 hours notice?
Without any notice.
Without any notice?
Yeah, it's got a discrete task, and the Brown Act carves out an exception for that so that there is no notice requirements. But the consequence of the applicants speaking candidly to the commissioners who are members of that ad hoc group is that one other person who receives the wrong information could equal a violation.
You mean the candidates?
I mean the board members, the commissioners. Let me not be so opaque. I'm applying to be the replacement commissioner. I come and speak to the 4 commissioners at the ad hoc committee, and they all tell me that I'm a strong candidate and I need to work on something as far as it relates to the, what the board is looking for. That person comes and speaks to you, who's not on that ad hoc group, and says, oh, the 4 of them said I need to do this, and we are, what I'm looking for is your approval for my candidacy because we've already said that. Well, then you have a potential violation.
So candidates can't talk to more than 5 people on the board?
They can, it's just, I can't give you a super clear answer because I'm not sure what the communications will be. There are clearly people who come and discuss things with commissioners outside the presence of the board. It just is, I'm not sure what the content will be, but it always is a concern for us when there is more than 5 people who have now spoken with one person, if that person is relaying information about something that somebody else said, because then you have the spoke of the wheel, serial communication.
So once again, my question is, my question goes back to these Q&A sections by the ad hoc committee could ultimately not be public.
I don't know what the committee is going to choose.
So can we get a clarification on that? Because I just want to make sure that, in my mind, there is, if these ad hoc committees are public meetings in which people can attend, which ultimately, I would love it if somebody could actually videotape it so I can watch it myself in my own private room. I want to make sure that because it is a public meeting that I'm allowed to discuss with 4 people, whoever I choose, whether or not they're on the committee. But if what I'm hearing is that because that this ad hoc committee might not be open to the public, or there might be private discussions among the 4 people that are not done in public, then I understand why we shouldn't have to be able to choose our 4. So I just want to make sure, because the last time around I feel like people felt left out. I mean, I shouldn't say people, I felt left out. So I want to make sure that if, that I don't, try to talk to people on the committee, I just want to make sure.
The last time this process was initiated, the ad hoc committee allowed, I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, allowed the public to come in during the vetting process. But I don't know, I mean, I'm not sure about this one.
Historically, it's always been an open process. It doesn't, by law, it doesn't need to be, but the committee's always done it as an open process.
Okay.
The one thing I just want to say, the one thing that can't happen is a member of the committee cannot speak to any other board member. So that is clear, because they're sitting as 4 and they've already discussed, so they can't.
So once again, I mean, and you don't have to give me an answer right now, but based on my understanding, if you make comments as a commissioner, no matter what commission you sit on, as long as it's a public meeting, that does not count as your private 4. So I just want to make sure that, whether, unless I'm wrong, I'm seeing head shakes, it would be good if I can get either like a legal memo or something just to explain that, because right now what I don't understand is, once again, if it's a public meeting and commissioners are forced to speak in front of the public, that they are allowed to have a public 4 and then their own private 4. So,
Commissioner Alpert.
Can I just, I think we're going to adopt these rules. Can I request that this discussion happen offline so we can continue with the meeting? Because it seems clear that people need clarification, but that can happen after the meeting.
That's
Are
fine.
you calling the question on this
I'm not gonna
topic?
call the
Because
question.
I feel like as a commissioner, it's important that I'm able to ask my questions.
Sure.
Thank you. But I am done asking questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do have a question. We have a motion on the table right now, but we do need to discuss this evening and determine how the order of the candidates when they make the presentation, so I just, for clarification, can we vote on this motion and then discuss this?
Sure.
Okay, so let's take a vote on the motion on the table right now.
Roll call.
Yes.
Okay. Did you want me to restate the
Yes, please.
motion? So this is to adopt the committee's recommendation with the following change. In the last sentence of section 4A, change the text to read, quote, "If any candidates tie both in first and second place totals, comma, the candidate to be voted on first by the board will be determined by a coin flip done by the executive director or his designee." Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
So roll call.
yes.
Commissioner Alpert.
Aye.
Chang.
Abstain.
Stolowski.
Yes.
Simon Weisberg.
Yes.
Sotovejil.
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
Laverde.
No.
Motion carries 5-1-1-1.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now let's have an open discussion and see what you guys can come up with on how we want to order, the order that we want the candidates to present themselves. Commissioner Tregu.
Madam Chair, this is perhaps a process suggestion. Could we take up the appeal first and then revisit this? It is past 8.
It's 8:06. Not that.
Actually, I would like to finish this first. Let's finish this, and then we could focus on the appeal, because then we're going to come back, and it's going to be a long discussion. So let's get this through, and then we want to get the appeal done.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Tregu. Sotovihil, I'm sorry.
First of all, I'm not sure why this is not incorporated into the original memo in terms of, because it's relating to the item we just
Okay,
passed.
do you have a comment on how we should do it?
I'm speaking right now. Okay, just let me finish. So, are we allowed to vote on this, even though we just voted on the item ahead of us? Do we have to do a motion to reconsider? I'm not so sure why we're doing a process after we voted on the process.
So that's what we agreed upon. So does anyone here have an idea on how we want to let the candidates come and speak?
I'm
Commissioner
just asking,
Alpert.
legally, are we allowed to do this?
You can adjust it further, yes.
Okay.
So my recommendation is keep it simple, let people approach. We can take them in whatever order they come. I don't know why we have to make it more complicated than that.
Do we want to take them by alphabetical order? Does that matter? Do we want to go backwards alphabetical order?
My suggestion is randomly. Like, they can present themselves, and whoever gets there first can speak, and whoever, they can do it, yeah,
To everybody who signs up to speak then?
yeah.
In the order they sign up to speak? Yeah. Okay, is that a motion?
If,
I'll move it.
We don't.
Commissioner Chang seems confused.
no, I'm not confused. It's just that what I don't want is when 7 o'clock rolls in, or people just lined up to sign in. How about, if it's okay with you, that we do it based on who submitted the application first? Because what I don't want is for people to line up super early before a meeting, like they're waiting for, Black Friday. What I don't want is people to be waiting to go first versus if they submitted their application early, or whoever, we take it in the order in which we received the application, because that's a little different.
Commissioner Simon Weisberg?
I think that's going to be too difficult for staff to figure that out. And maybe not everybody comes. I think we are so lucky that we get a lot of people turning out. I think that, it's just going to be about turning in the cards, right?
Okay.
So if people,
Sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner
I
Solosky.
was going to suggest if some people are commissioners are uncomfortable with people lining up or alphabetical, they can submit the speaker card and you can shuffle the deck. It's random then. It's random. Okay? If that's what people prefer, I'm fine with any of them. I just want to move this along and make a decision.
Hold on, Commissioner Sotovihil. Jay, you want to say something?
The only thing, and I'm fine with that suggestion also, is that staff would be able to tell you who formally applied, but the rules you just adopted also allow somebody to just come and speak even if they haven't applied. So if we do your option, we need to account for that.
Thank you. Commissioner Sotovihil?
I think we're making it more difficult than it needs to be. When an item comes forward, especially something of this significance where we are appointing someone, you can have people coming for public comment who, on the actual item, not necessarily just under general public comment. You're going to have applicants who've been vetted by the subcommittee, and you're going to have new applicants potentially who never went through the vetting process. Let's not make it complicated and just let them show up. And we're big boys and big girls and big theys and et cetera. So let's just go ahead and move past this and let's do the appeal. We don't need to be voting on a process.
Okay. So,
It's ridiculous.
thank you.
Let's go.
So, Commissioner Alpert?
Yeah, I saw Ms. Mueller making the racking motion. I think we have a thing for randomly choosing cards, right?
Oh, I was just suggesting, like, what council
Yeah.
does, they have I don't know what the name of it is, but, sort of like for raffle tickets, I could put the cards in that
A lot of ways.
spinning cylindrical thing, and that could be one of the ways you randomize it.
So I
just
would,
an idea.
hold on. I would amend my motion with the consent of the seconder to be that we'll take cards for speakers who wish to present on their own behalf as applicants. We can put them in there, and then the staff can draw names, and we can take them in that order.
I think I was the seconder, and I'm friendly to that.
Okay, so let's, we have a motion on the table, so so we can take a roll call on this one, please.
Okay. Commissioner Alpert.
Aye.
Chang.
Yes.
Solosky.
Yes.
Simon Weisberg.
Yes.
Sotoville.
No with comment.
Now or later? Later, I guess. Tregu.
After the vote, that's when it always happens.
Not necessarily. Tregu.
Yes.
Liberte.
Yes.
Okay, comment.
Thank you. I think it's a completely unnecessary process we just did.
Okay.
And I think if we were going to do this process next time, let's do it with the actual item, so it's incorporated in the item, not a subsequent complete motion where it's not even on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now let's go to our appeal, because it's 8:10. So it's case number IRD/45, 1921 Delaware Street, unit number 5.
How many?
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask that you first identify yourselves, and then who are the petitioner, who's the respondent? Can I hear you? Can you?
Julie Theron.
Okay. And the respondent?
I'm Rachel Glanz. I'm here on behalf of the respondent, Mr. Stanley Mukabi.
Okay, thank you. So before we start, I would like to give a review of our procedure. First, our legal staff will give a summary of the case, and then afterwards, each party will have 7 minutes to address the board. The appellant first for 5 minutes, and then the respondent for 7 minutes, and then the appellant again for an additional 2 minutes. I'd like to remind both parties that this is not a new hearing of your case. No new evidence may be presented to the board. Your presentation must be based on the evidence that was before the hearing examiner. After each party has spoken, the board will deliberate and take action on the appeal. So, Mr. Brown, can you please give us a summary from the legal staff?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. This appeal seeks to overturn a hearing examiner's decision that the tenant permanently resides in Berkeley, despite the uncontroverted fact that he usually eats dinner, sleeps, and eats breakfast in Richmond with his wife. Legal staff recommends that the appeal be granted and the hearing examiner's decision be overturned because it is inconsistent with the precedent set by the board in prior appeals. As a preliminary matter, on August 9th, 2019, 8 months after the record was closed and 3 weeks after the original appeal hearing date, the tenant submitted new testimony that changes his prior testimony. The Rent Board's procedures, which are designed to protect both parties from gamesmanship and surprise arguments, strictly prohibit the admission of this new testimony into the record. Basic principles of fairness require that the parties not be allowed to introduce new evidence at the 11th hour because of the enormous disadvantage such a tactic creates for the other party. For these reasons, legal staff strenuously recommends that the board not consider the new testimony in the tenant's August 9 declaration. Here's an overview of the facts on the record. The landlord alleges that the tenant has not resided in Berkeley since marrying in 2009, and he permanently resides at his wife's home in Richmond. The tenant concedes that he eats dinner, sleeps, and eats breakfast in Richmond, but argues that his daily activities are conducted in Berkeley. The hearing examiner ruled that the tenant's activities during the daytime suffice to establish that he permanently resides in the subject rental unit, despite the fact that most people perform these daytime activities at their place of work rather than in their residence. On appeal, the landlord argues that the evidence cited by the hearing examiner was unreliable and does not support the legal conclusion that, quote, the tenant continues to actually occupy the unit, close quote, or any other legal standard for residency. Although legal staff's review of the record found that the factual basis of the hearing examiner's decision is supported by substantial evidence, we agree that with the appellant that the decision fails to properly apply the legal standard of residency to the factual findings rendered in the decision. This is an IRD petition in which the board must apply Costa-Hawkins requirement that a landlord be permitted to set a new initial rent when the original occupant no longer permanently resides in the unit. Regulation 1018 D2 requires the board to consider only where the tenant resided as of the date of filing, and not on some hypothetical future date or on some particular date in the past. Rent board precedent in 2 prior appeals with similar facts requires more than mere intent to reserve the unit for non-residential use or as a contingency for future residential use. Specifically, in the Sharp case in 2013, the board rejected an almost identical claim by a married couple who chose to spend their days apart. There, the tenant worked at his computer during the daytime in the rental unit and then dined and slept in the home he shared with his wife. In rejecting the claim, the board noted in its decision that most people would agree that the majority of their, quote, brain work, computer time, and daytime living occur at their office, workplace, and that they return home to eat and sleep. In his untimely opposition to the staff recommendation, the tenant argues that he is only temporarily absent from the unit, changing his testimony during the hearing and his prior sworn declarations. A similar claim was rejected by the board in the Chestnut v. Ortiz case in 2015, in which the tenant claimed that she intended to keep the rental unit as her eventual place of return, but that she had no immediate plans to actually return there. As here, the sublet half of the rental unit, she sublet half of the rental unit, but retained control of her bedroom. In the hearing, she conceded that she was living in San Francisco for the foreseeable future. The board chose to apply the precedent set in the Sharp case to the Ortiz case. The board therefore reversed the hearing examiner's decision and granted the landlord's petition. The foundation of the Ortiz decision was a decision in Sharp, and a recognition that the legal standard for IRD petitions must not deviate substantially from that of D petitions. After the Ortiz case, the board decided Ganaway-Gissemi v. Wagner in 2018, in which a landlord seeking an exemption as an owner-occupant was found not to reside in the subject property, despite the fact that she slept in the unit 3 to 4 nights a week, and this fact was not disputed. The board determined that because she spent the rest of her week with her husband, she actually resided with him in Santa Cruz, despite working in Richmond and sleeping in Richmond roughly half the time. I'm sorry. Working in Richmond and sleeping in Berkeley roughly half the time. A different decision regarding the tenant's residence in the case at hand would be incongruent with a decision in which a landlord is held to a different standard. Here, the facts are almost identical to Sharp, and the tenant sleeps in the residence significantly less frequently than the landlord did in Ganaway-Gissemi case. The board should follow its own precedent and reverse the hearing examiner's decision so as not to dramatically loosen the standard for residency applied to tenants and landlords alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first, we're going to give the appellant 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Julie Theron, representative of Lipnowski Real Estate. Per your own legal staff's recommendation memorandum, they recommended reversing the hearing examiner's decision, concluding that Mr. Mugabe no longer permanently resides in the rental unit because the activities he carries out at the Richmond residence more closely align with residency than those he performs in the subject rental unit. The evidence presented by Lipnowski at the hearing provided substantial evidence that Mr. Mugabe permanently resides with his wife in Richmond and not at the subject property. The fact that Mr. Mugabe spends evenings, every night, mornings and portions of weekends with his wife in Richmond is not in dispute. The testimony of Mr. Mugabe and his witnesses show that even when he comes to Berkeley, he does not always spend time in the subject unit, but only occasionally goes to the unit to bathe, watch a movie, or do paperwork at his desk. The main facts in this case are undisputed. For many years, Lipnowski employees and I have suspected that Mr. Mugabe was not residing at the subject property. After online searches of Mr. Mugabe's name brought up a Richmond address, I asked him, point blank, if he was living in Richmond. He replied that he had a girlfriend in Richmond and spent a lot of time there. It was only when Mr. Mugabe was confronted at the hearing with Lipnowski's discovery of an interspousal grant deed that he testified that he was indeed married as of 2009, or 2007 according to his wife's testimony. And in 2006, he gave up his parking space at the subject apartment building. When our property manager, Bill Shepner, who is here with me tonight, moved to the subject property in March of 2018, it was very apparent to him that Mr. Mugabe did not reside at the property. Bill testified in great detail to this fact. Bill and I spent much time gathering information about Mr. Mugabe's true residence and his daily habits. This included a log that I kept showing the number of times I observed Mr. Mugabe's van outside the Richmond residence, and also written statements from other tenants who attested to not seeing him at the subject property in ages or identifying him as an occupant. At the hearing, Mr. Mugabe presented a PG&E bill from September 2018 for the subject unit in the amount of $19.70 in order to show his residency. Bill Shepner testified that such a small bill indicated utility used by only one person. Mr. Mugabe testified that the reason for his complicated and different arrangement with his wife was to keep their things separate, but yet he also testified that he files a joint tax return using the Richmond address. The hearing officer argued that the evidence shows that Mr. Mugabe has divided his time between the Richmond residence and the subject unit. In fact, the evidence shows that although Mr. Mugabe may come to Berkeley during the day, the time actually spent in the subject unit is minimal. Mr. Mugabe and his wife testified that he does not go to Berkeley on Tuesdays or Thursdays because he babysits on these days. His wife also testified that they spend time together on weekends in Richmond. Mr. Mugabe testified that when he comes to Berkeley, he's involved in other such activities, like hiking, eating out at restaurants, shopping at local grocery stores, or visiting with friends. Mr. Shepner testified that Mr. Mugabe only came to the subject unit to meet Lipnowski maintenance staff to provide access for unit repairs or to pick up mail that could just as easily be delivered to his Richmond address, like his IRS correspondence that goes to his Richmond address. It should also be noted that Mr. Mugabe used his Richmond address for his voter registration, but changed this on the exact same day of the initial petition hearing. Subtenant Ms. Gangor Valentim testified that she occasionally saw Mr. Mugabe at the subject unit, and only one time had she observed him taking a shower there. In closing, I want to thank the legal staff for the professional job that they did in concluding that Mr. Mugabe does not permanently reside in the subject unit because the activities he carries out at the Richmond residence more closely align with residency than those he performs in the subject unit. The board should follow its own precedent and reverse the hearing examiner's decision, and Lipnowski should be permitted the right to a Costa-Hawkins vacancy rent adjustment on the subject unit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the respondents have 7 minutes.
Thank you. So to start, I'd like to respond to a few things that
Identify yourself, please.
Rachel Glanz on behalf of Mr. Stanley Mukabi.
Great, thank you.
So I'd like to first respond to a few things that the petitioner brought up. First, Ms. Valentine is not a subtenant of Mr. Mukabi. She is a roommate. They live there. They have 2 separate bedrooms. They've been living there for a number of years together. And I'd also like to put forth that he returns to the Berkeley unit every single day. And then I'd also like to respond to the legal staff's comments that new evidence is generally not considered on appeal, and we recognize this. We would like to stress that it's not exactly new evidence that we're putting forward. It's more of an explanation of information that was presented at the initial hearing. Mr. Mukabi mentioned at the initial hearing that he needs to spend each night in Richmond with his wife because he needs to walk her dogs. And what he did not explain was that she suffers from a health condition, sciatica, which causes pain and weakness in her lower legs. And because of that, she is unable to walk the dogs herself at night because there is a risk that she might fall and injure herself further. So she began suffering in 2017. Since then, he has been sleeping there each night. That was not the situation prior to 2017. And she actually was not diagnosed until 2018, so it wasn't until then that she was prescribed physical therapy treatments. And she has since been doing those. Her condition is improving, and Mr. Mukabi plans to resume sleeping in Berkeley once her condition stabilizes, which he expects to be very soon. So again, we want to stress it's not new evidence, it's merely an explanation. And we also think there's good cause to consider this new information here because Mr. Mukabi was unrepresented in the first hearing. He's an unsophisticated litigant. He has no prior experience with the rent board or with housing matters. And from our conversations with him, it's clear that he was under the impression that he could only respond to the hearing examiner's questions and could not raise any additional facts. So that is why this did not come up. And finally, this information about his wife's condition, it bears directly on the application of prior rent board decisions that the legal staff has cited, the Sharp and Ortiz case. It shows why these cases do not apply, because in fact, there was no temporary interruption of the tenant's residencies in those cases. And a further case, Williamson v. Nessel, which is a case cited in the Ortiz case, a case cited in the legal staff's recommendation. That case makes clear that where a tenant's residency is temporarily interrupted by a family obligation or some other extenuating circumstance, that is not grounds to find that the tenant no longer permanently resides there. So long as the unit is maintained for personal use and the absence is temporary, even if it's for a period of multiple years, the rent board has found in the past and can, and we urge should find tonight, that the tenant still permanently resides there. Especially in a case like this where Mr. Mukabi's entire life is in Berkeley. He's been living here since 1982. Again, he returns to Berkeley every single day. He's a very active man. He's out and about in the community. And so this finding is especially justified here. So again, that case Williamson, in that case, the tenant's residency was interrupted by an obligation to care for his ailing mother in Israel. She ended up living longer than the doctors expected. He ended up spending 10 years living in Israel and caring for his mother, during which time he was away from his Berkeley unit. He kept his furniture in Berkeley, he paid rent without subletting, and he paid for his utility fees. And so the rent board found that given his intention to return to Berkeley once his mother passed away, that he did still permanently reside in Berkeley, despite the fact that he was away from the unit for 10 years. We think the Williamson case is strikingly similar to Mr. Mukabi's case. Like the tenant in Williamson, Mr. Mukabi has a family obligation, his wife's condition, that has temporarily interrupted his residency. And like the tenant in Williamson, he intends to resume sleeping in Berkeley once his wife's condition improves. I'd also like to just quote some language from the Ortiz case, which is a case that the legal staff cites. I quote, "Where facts support a finding that a tenant's residency was temporarily interrupted by family emergency, for example, then a finding that the tenant subjectively intends to return to her home in Berkeley could reasonably support a determination that the tenant still permanently resides there. Key components of this analysis may include findings that the interruption is the result of a discrete family task or obligation, that the interruption is not based on convenience, but rather necessity, or that the interruption will end whether on a certain date or upon completion of a certain task. All of these factors are met in Mr. Mukabe's case. There is an interruption in his residency that's the result of a discrete family obligation. It's not based on convenience, but necessity. His wife risks health injuries if he does not assist her in this way. And the interruption will end when her condition stabilizes, and as he had said, that is soon. I'd also like to elaborate more on the distinctions between the Ortiz and Sharp case in this case. So in Ortiz, the board found that none of those factors were present. There was nothing forbidding the tenant from resuming residency in her unit. The tenant also had moved all of her belongings out of her apartment and rented it out to multiple subtenants over the course of 8 years. It's clear to everyone here that Mr. Mukabe has not done these things. He has not moved out his things. He has never rented out his room to a single subtenant, and he, again, returns to the unit every day. The Sharp case is also inapplicable because the tenant there didn't maintain the unit as a residence. He filled the bath and the shower with boxes, using his apartment as an office. Mr. Mukabe uses his apartment as a residence. All of his rooms are used for what they would be used for in a normal residency. He showers at the unit frequently, and he maintains it as his residence. And so, again, we recognize that new evidence is generally not considered on appeal, and so we do urge that you consider this information here tonight, but we recognize that it's new information, so if you feel that it prejudices the petitioner, we would like to request that the case is remanded back to the hearing examiner to relitigate solely on the issue of the medical condition and the reason for his absence.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Thorne, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Okay, since this is all new to me, are you accepting all of this new evidence that I thought was not allowed to be presented today?
Well, you can respond to what was just presented, and then we will discuss. So, but
Okay, well, it is my clear understanding that the board is not allowed to hear any evidence that is new, that is very different from what was heard at the original hearing. And so I'm asking everyone here today to ignore the last 7 minutes of what she has just said, because this is completely new evidence, and there is absolutely no evidence that has ever been presented that Mr. Stanley Mugabe is at the apartment every day, like she says, and I have nothing further to say.
yes, as we said earlier, or as I said earlier, we do not accept new evidence that is presented. So open up to discussion. Commissioner Simon Weisberg?
Well, I was going to ask a question of, I can't remember whether you are you're the petitioners,
Yes.
and so you're the respondents. I guess I had a question on whether there seems to be an emphasis, your argument around that there's been an interruption, but that it's temporary, that he intends to return to sleep. So what happens if so is this all turn on whether he sleeps there at night? Is that the only issue? And what if he doesn't choose to continue to sleep there?
So, I mean, his entire life is in Berkeley, so the decision has been focused on the fact that that's really the only reason I think that it was found that he does not reside in Berkeley is his sleeping in Richmond. But he has told us that his wife's condition is improving. Again, she was not diagnosed actually until 2018, so there was no ability for her to have treatment before that time. He loves his life in Berkeley. He is desperate to maintain his residence there. I think we can trust Mr. Mukabe that he will continue to sleep there once he's able to do so.
But I guess my question is, from a legal perspective, are you articulating that what the interruption, it seems, when you're using that analysis, is based on whether he's sleeping there or not sleeping there? Would you agree with that's the turning point here?
I'm not sure that's my call. It seems that is the only thing I can think for why he would be found not to reside in Berkeley, given that the rest of his life is at Berkeley. He often has breakfast there and spends his whole day there, so it's really just him sleeping in Richmond, which was the reason for finding that he might not reside in Berkeley anymore. So
So I guess you know, one of the things that I think, at least for myself, you know, that we have decided recently about a landlord who lived and slept for 3 to 4 days in an apartment, and we determined that the second, you know, that their other place that we had decided was where their family lived. And so I guess what my concern is that how do you distinguish that case? Why does that not apply?
I think I would emphasize the interruption, given that this was not Mr. Mukabe's, this was not the way things were done before 2017. He would spend many nights in his Berkeley unit. It's clear that there has been an interruption here. And also, another distinction is all of his daily activities are in Berkeley. So I personally think that is enough, but that's a way to distinguish.
How would his daily activities, I mean, if he was working here, how would the daily activities be different? I understand he's retired, and so because of that, there's a difference. But, you know, people come to our libraries, people come to our community centers, use our, you know, and lots of folks who've been displaced from Berkeley continue to have their communities here and come. We have people, how is that different?
I think you can look to what he's actually doing during the day. He's residing in his unit. He's cooking there, he's taking naps there, he's socializing with his roommate, Miss Valentine. They sometimes watch movies together. These are not things that you do at a library. These are things that you do at your residence.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solosky, and then I'll go to Councilor Brown.
Can I? I want to ask a question of Councilor Brown, if that's okay.
Sure.
But let me preface this first by Mr. Mukabe's situation, circumstance, certainly his wife's illness, of course, raises some sympathy here. And I'm trying to bifurcate the sympathy from the facts as we were given at the hearing. And my question to you, Councilor Brown, we have this memo from this August 9th memo, which does introduce additional and possibly substantial information. Is it just, my question to you is it an explanation of existing information, or does it go beyond that?
No, we think it changes the testimony. We think that it unfairly prejudices the landlord appellant in this case, who, you know, the record has been closed for 8 months or 9 months on this, and this substantially changes the testimony given at the hearing. A couple other things, the idea that Mr. Mukabe was an unsophisticated party who was not able to negotiate the waters of this hearing is somewhat controverted by the fact that he submitted several declarations that were drafted with some precision in support of his original petition at the hearing. The other thing I'd like to say to respond to the respondents' counsel's assertion that just intending to move back is good enough. In Mr. Mukabe's own sworn declaration that he submitted on August 8th, along with this new testimony, or along with the brief, he writes, I quote, "She has been showing improvements, and I plan to resume sleeping in Berkeley several nights a week once her condition stabilizes." Well, that's the exact same facts that you all determined that the Richmond doctor who lived in Santa Cruz but did not reside in Berkeley, she spent, and this was undisputed, 3 to 4 nights a week in Berkeley, sleeping in Berkeley. So even if you are to accept this new testimony, it doesn't rise to the standard that you've since created or established in other cases. I want to also say that the Williamson case was decided over 10 years ago, and that the Ghassemi case was decided last year. That information, the board's thinking on this, the board's decision on this was not available at that time. You now have an opportunity to be consistent in the way that you're applying rules of residency for landlords and tenants.
Thank you. Commissioner Sotovejil?
I was here for the Sharp determination, and it's very distinguishable from this case. And I'm glad you asked whether or not this new memo changes the facts being presented or they're new facts. Now, when I read the memo, I didn't see any new facts, just an argument using the facts. But I'm going to not look at that because we have 3 options. One is that we support the staff's recommendation, or we reverse it, or we remand this to incorporate the medical condition and incorporate this memo that we received, which I think is important. I believe we're supposed to determine whether or not a residency exists or a tenancy is in occupancy under 1018C. Is that correct?
No, that's the D petitions, which is Regulation 524 and 525. So
I mean, I'm sorry.
Primary
524,
occupancy.
I misspoke, 524B,
Okay.
right? Determining occupancy. That's what we're working on.
No,
On a
that's
preponderance of evidence here?
No, that's a D petition. This is an IRD petition. It's Regulation 1018. The IRD petition is most closely aligned with Costa-Hawkins, which allows for rental adjustments. The D petition is something that the board drafted and adopted to provide landlords relief when tenants are using their unit for secondary occupancy.
So we're not dealing with 524 at all on this?
Correct.
Okay. We'll come back to me then.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Alpert?
I guess I have a question for the respondent, which is kind of regardless of all the other evidence, the tenant registered to vote in Richmond. And to me, most of the evidence, there's a wash either way. You know, it's kind of a he said, she said about the number of times a day he was there. But he registered to vote in Richmond. And to me, when you register to vote, you're making a statement about where you reside and where your community is. Could you address that as to why that wouldn't necessarily?
Sure. So I spoke to Mr. Mukabe about this. I mean, the fact is that he is married. He got married later in life, and they have very established lives. She has a whole family that lives near her, and he has his life in Berkeley, and so they decided to live separately. But they are married, and he was not born in this country, so he did not register to vote until pretty recently, later on in his life, and it was something that he did with his wife. I mean, I see what you're saying. It's a statement for most people about where they live. The facts that he presented to me were this was an activity that he did with his wife. They registered to vote together.
So if he's registering to vote with his wife, filing taxes with his wife, all in Richmond, that would seem to indicate that he lives in Richmond. Excuse me, that would seem to indicate that he lives in Richmond.
I just real quickly, to the extent that Respondents' Counsel is offering new testimony, it should be disregarded because that's not necessarily in the record. So I don't want to thwart the effort to respond to your questions. I'm saying that the questions might be eliciting testimony that is not necessarily proper because A, it's not coming from Mr. Mukabe, and B, it's not in the record. The one other thing that I wanted to say in response to a commissioner who said that these are not new facts, the existence of the family obligation is absolutely a new fact, and it can't be described any differently. It's not an explanation for anything that was there. It's simply a new fact.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Trega?
Thank you. Well, I was on the WEMP board in 2010 when Williamson was adjudicated. It was 9 years ago, so I don't recall. I assume I voted on the prevailing side of that. So my question for legal staff is, maybe you can enlighten me on the history here. When we talk about precedent, and you mentioned that there are more recent cases, but I thought that cases are equally precedential, no matter when they are adjudicated. So at what point did the legal theory of being able to take care of someone and then move back home, and all the while that being considered one's principal residence, what is the point at which that stopped being a precedential determination?
Well, let me try and answer this. It's a little bit of a layered question, so I'll try and answer it the best I can. It's never, and I'll double negative this here, it's never not been a consideration. It always is a consideration. Each case is different. When the Williamson's case was decided, I believe that the citation to 2010 is incorrect. I believe it was decided before that. Bren's checking on that right now. I believe that when that was decided, that Regulation 1018 did not even exist. This concept that there would be two ways of determining occupancy issues did not even exist back when the Williamson case was decided. The requirements associated with Regulation 1018 are somewhat more rigid because they are directly related to a state law, Costa-Hawkins, whereas the requirements in D is the board simply crafting a solution to tenants not using a unit as their primary occupancy, and essentially an underhousing, a response to tenants who are not using their rent-controlled unit for occupancy, and nobody else is either. But the concept, if I can respond directly to you, Commissioner Trego, of whether or not somebody's temporary absence would affect their primary residency or primary occupancy or permanent residency is always considered.
Okay. And then my follow-up question to that, and I recognize, I'll preface this by saying I take it on its face that the information that we have in front of us from the tenants' representatives is new information. I think that determination is a close one for me, because I do see the tenants' representatives' argument as well. But I think I do side with your counsel that it is new information. So my question is, in terms of options available to us, in addition to an up or down decision, could we remand it for the sake of adjudicating or asking staff to adjudicate on that one remaining question?
The options for you are limitless. You can make recommendations or adopt something that has nothing to do with legal staff's recommendation, if you wish. I would recommend that if you do remand it, that you remand it with instructions to the hearing examiner to decide whether or not to allow this new testimony and these new facts after some 8 or 9 months after the record has closed, rather than remanding it to specifically decide whether or not that issue affects the decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sotovihi.
Thank you. I'm trying to clarify my analysis so that I can vote properly. Under our appeal of IRD 145, page 12 of 12 of, well, actually, it's this page 60 of the hearing examiner's decision on 12 of 12, the last page. The hearing examiner talks about preponderance of evidence. So is that the standard that the landlords have to prove that he's vacated his tenancy, correct?
Preponderance of evidence is the burden of proof for all rent
Right.
board cases.
Okay, so, okay, I got that right, all right. And so we're trying to determine whether or not he maintained a possessory interest in the subject unit. Is that correct?
You're trying to determine whether or not he no longer permanently resides in the subject unit.
Right.
That's the flashpoint.
Right, and so in using some of the elements defined in Regulation 524, that helps the board historically decide on whether or not he lives there.
Yeah.
Right. So when I asked earlier, using those elements are proper, you said no, I thought.
No, what you asked is this a 524, is this a 524 claim? Is this a
Okay.
D claim? And
Okay,
it's
great.
not. It's an IRD claim.
It's an IRD, correct.
The IRD claim is not as fully,
Elaborate as the 524.
thank you, because the IRD is connected so intrinsically to state law, whereas the D claim is a separate board animal
Got
that the
it.
board did by the grace of its own heart.
So the preponderance of evidence I'm going to use for my decision is generally the outline of 524, which is kind of a good,
So the
basis,
concept
right?
of preponderance of evidence isn't necessarily, those are objective indicia of residency that are
Right.
listed in 524. The concept of preponderance of evidence is that you are convinced by at least 51% that
right, more
somebody's-
likely than not.
Yes.
Yes, I
So,
understand.
but it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with using 524 or
Got you.
1018
I got you.
or any other regulation.
But it's, we can use them. So let me throw this out there. I'm not going to support, well, I'm going to support the hearing examiner, and I'll tell you why. Is when I look at basic living activities, this is distinguishable from Sharp because when we determined Sharp did not live in his residency in question for that hearing, he actually never took showers there. It was used solely as an office. He didn't really reside there. He went every single night to his wife's house up the street. This is different because, one, the current, what's your name again? I'm sorry.
Mukabi.
Mojave. Mukabi, sorry about that. His wife is not in good health, whereas in the Sharp case, there was no question about that. So, and then he does come back similarly to, as Sharp does, to his unit every day, or most days, but in fact, he takes showers, which is different. He eats there. He actually has somebody living there as well.
Sharp ate there too. He ate in his, I mean, he spent all day in his.
Yeah, he did.
In his rental unit. So I mean, the only difference is bathing.
Right, which is a daily living activity, one would hope. And then he doesn't maintain another property. In fact, his Mukavi's wife owns the other property. And if they ever got divorced and we determine that
That's the same thing with Sharp. She owned the property. He wasn't. Jim Sharp was not on the title, so it's exactly the same.
Okay. And then in terms of motor vehicle registration, Mr. Mukavi has motor vehicle registration and a driver's license, although he's voting in Richmond, which I understand why, because the Richmond Progressive Alliance needs more votes. Even though you didn't vote for us, that's okay. Or against us. Utilities are met. Personal possessions are in there. And then, again, I do think the reasonable temporary periods of absences is essential for any tenant to be able to use. And I think that I don't want to make a motion because I want to make a substitute if that's the case. But are we more inclined to do a remand or support Mukabi? I will make a motion to support the hearing examiner's decision, and that's my motion.
Is there a second? Going once, going twice? Commissioner Solosky. Commissioner Solosky?
Okay, again, I have sympathy for Mr. Mukabi and his situation, circumstances.
Can I please
My
talk?
concern here
No,
is that
it's all new evidence.
we're applying different rules at different times, different standards at different times. If we remand, if we don't reverse our hearing officer's decision. So I'm going to move, for consistency's sake, which is worth something to me, that we accept our staff recommendation for tonight, overturning, reversing the hearing officer's decision.
I will second that. Let's start first with Commissioner Alpert and then move down the line.
I think I'd like to make an alternate motion to,
Substitute?
an alternate motion, which would be voted on before the main motion.
Yes.
That's a
Yeah.
substitute
Yes.
motion.
Substitute motion? I'll make a substitute motion. Thank you. To go, I believe you made a recommendation, if we weren't going to overturn the hearing examiner's decision, we should remand it to the hearing examiner for the purposes of considering whether to accept the new evidence.
I will second that with an amendment, if you're friendly to that. I have the specific language drafted here.
Please.
It would be to consider whether there is good cause to consider the new evidence that has been introduced tonight.
I accept that.
Commissioner Chang, hold on.
Both Commissioners Alpert and Tragub has made my statements.
Okay, so we should take a vote, Amy, on the substitute motion?
Yeah, if I can just,
Yes, go ahead.
if I can just clarify the motion.
Yes.
So moved by Alpert, seconded by Tregub, to remand the decision to the hearing examiner to consider whether there is good cause to consider the evidence presented tonight. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
The August 9th
Sorry.
brief memo.
Do you
I'm
mind if you refine it to say what Commissioner Solosky
That's really
said?
what we're talking.
Yeah,
We're talking about the August 9th memo brief.
because what will be before the hearing examiner, assuming that the board adopts this, and we don't recommend that you do, but assuming that you do adopt it, will not be what was discussed tonight. It would be the substance of the documents submitted by the respondent and the respondent's attorneys.
Yes.
On
I'm
August
friendly
9th.
to that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could someone restate the motion in its entirety, just so I can make sure I get it?
So instead of, you can strike the last phrase, consider in consideration of, and it would be with regard to the new evidence, facts, and testimony submitted in the August 9th. I can get you the exact name of it. The August 9th respondent's brief in opposition to legal staff's recommendation on appeal. If you want to just leave a space for that, I can get with you after the meeting.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Thank you. So we can take a vote.
I'd like clarity. I need some clarity real quick before I vote.
Okay, so are you going to have a question of staff?
No, I'm asking questions to the motion makers. Is that okay?
I think it was pretty clear. I think it's been very clear. So I think we should take a vote on this.
Unless it's clear to me.
Okay, then you don't have to vote. You can keep quiet.
What's your
So let's
problem,
take-
Paula? Excuse me,
let's take-
time out.
please,
As a commissioner, I have the right to be
you're
able
not
to vote on the
acknowledged right
things that,
now.
I need clarity. Commissioner Chang got clarity earlier, and
So
I
you're not
deserve
being
clarity as
acknowledged,
well.
Commissioner. Do you mind? So
So
we
my
need to move
question
on.
is-
You're not acknowledged right now. You're out of order.
What is your problem?
No, I have no problem. I want to move the process on. We've had discussion.
This is
So please,
unacceptable behavior from a
Okay.
chair, because I want clarification on what we're voting on.
you're out of order, Commissioner.
No, actually, you're out of
You-
order.
Out of order.
No, this is not acceptable. I'm not going to vote for something that I don't know what I'm voting on. I need clarity. Motion is censored.
Okay.
The chair, allow me to be able to ask my question.
Amy, can you please?
Can I get a second on that? I want to ask my question to the maker and the seconder. Is that not okay?
You have not been acknowledged.
Wow.
So, Amy, can you please read the motion, please? Or what's on? The table?
I will try.
You guys got to speak up. This is unacceptable.
So to remand the decision to the hearing examiner with regard to the new evidence, facts, and testimony present in the August 9th respondent's brief that Matt Brown was going to fill in because I couldn't write fast enough to get it all down.
See, there we go. Do we even know what we're voting on?
You're out of
Thank
order,
you.
Commissioner.
I
You are
believe
out
that
of
there
order.
was a request by the motion, by the maker of the motion, or rather the seconder of the motion, to determine whether there is good cause to consider the evidence,
Yes.
testimony. Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I understood you to say that we were striking that and replacing it with the statement that you
not the
made.
good cause part. Sorry if I made that.
Okay.
That was.
So then
unclear.
I'm not clear on the motion. I apologize.
Thank you.
So, as I understand it, is we're going to remand to decide whether or not to allow the new facts that were presented on August 9th. Commissioner Alpert, is that correct? And
Could we have Mr. Brown just read his understanding of the motion one last time, so we can all be clear?
Wow.
So the substitute motion is to remand the matter to the hearing examiner to determine whether good cause exists to admit the new facts, evidence, and testimony included in the August 9th submittal by the respondent, which Matt Brown will give the formal title of the submittal to Amy afterwards.
That is my understanding of the motion.
And mine as well.
Question.
Great.
you have a question?
Yeah,
You're acknowledged.
thank you. Do we really need the language to determine whether good cause exists?
Yes.
We do. Okay. That was my question from the beginning. Thank you
Great,
very much.
thank you very much. Okay,
I consulted with the attorney on this board.
so let's take a vote on this.
Roll call.
Yes, a roll call.
Commissioner Alpert.
Aye.
Chang.
Pass.
Pavlet is absent. Solosky.
No.
Simon Weisberg.
Yes.
Sotoville.
Yes.
Tregu.
Yes.
Commissioner Chang.
Yes.
Laverde.
No.
Motion carries 5201.
Okay, thank you. Can we take a break, please?
Yes, please. The captioner could use that as well.
Wow. Time to leave the city.
You dismissed? Okay.
What that means is we're going to have another hearing to determine whether they will accept the new facts that we presented. So it's not completely, because we could have that hearing and they could ultimately decide, no, we're only going to go with what we said in the first one, but it's better than losing.
Okay, Chair, I'm ready whenever you are. Mics are going back on.
I'm calling our meeting back to order. So we're now in our Section 7 information announcements and news articles. So let's start out with item number 1, our update on annual registration, billing, and online payment. I'm going to ask the executive director to give us an update on that. I'm very curious and the number of new registrations or the number of registrations we have and all that detailed data that is so great that we can collect.
For the current year, the registration fees which were due for the bills that were sent out on May 15th and bills that were due July 1st, we've collected a little bit over 97% of the fees that were due. There's only about 190 properties comprising about 680 units that haven't been, that we list as we believe are rented, which haven't been paid for yet. Collected over almost just under $4.9 million in registration fees. So it's going very well.
Okay, do you have the number of registered rent control units?
The ones that have been paid for
Yes,
are just about 19,000, just a little over 19,000, I think.
just a little 19,000. Okay, thank you very much. So we go to item 2, buyout offers and agreements. I thought that was very interesting. I hope everyone had a chance to look at that.
Yes, I think it speaks for itself. We're just, if the board members have any questions, this is, as you know, the council asked us to track these under the city ordinance. Owners file them with us, so this is just a copy of a report that we also submitted to the city council.
Great, great. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about the item 3, updates and upcoming rent board outreach events?
Yeah, we have several things. Just since this is from last meeting as well as this one, we had, let me see what's coming up. We had, in early August, we had national, just recently we had National Night Out on August 6th. We have the Solano Stroll coming up on September 8th. We have Calapalooza on September 5th. Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12th. A Landlord 101 workshop on September 10th. And a Tenant 101 workshop later in September. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me. And we also are going to begin resuming counseling. Oh, thank you. The tenants workshop is Friday the 13th. Not sure if that's good. But, and then in October, we're going to have evictions in Berkeley, a seminar for landlords. And then in September, we're going to begin resuming counseling at the South Berkeley Senior Center.
Okay, and so we have some more data coming up on number 4. It's the updated rent board regulation appendices B, C, and D, which basically provides us the consumer price index. And you know what I find really great is that we provide the CPI since 1979, correct? To 2019. And so are the numbers on like under, you know, for 2019 it says 253.308. Is that how much the CPI is with the 65%? Or can you explain those numbers to me?
No, those are just raw numbers, CPI numbers. The 65% is only adjusted during the AGA report as it relates to the delta between the year prior and the current year.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to note that on Appendix C, one person can now make up to $69,000 and be eligible for HUD. So that's pretty good. I think it's interesting how expensive things are around here. For item number 5, which I wanted to get to, it is the letter that 4 rent board commissioners, myself, the vice chair, Commissioner Solosky, and Commissioner Tragub, sent as comments to the Adeline Corridor Specific Plan and the draft environmental impact review. I think it's a shame that we did not reach quorum last month, and so the introductory paragraph had to be removed as to why the rent board was so interested in making comment about the Adeline Corridor. I just want to mention that in that area, 63.7% of tenants living in that area are renters. And so, and there are 3,795 rental housing units, and who knows how many of those are in the rent control. So the corridor plan could dramatically impact a rent-controlled tenants. And so we made comments about how we would like we would like to recommend that the specific plan include a provision for protections of current residents in rent-controlled units and a one-for-one replacement of any demolished rent-controlled units. That was our recommendation. The other recommendation we had was that the plan was lacking in development and implementation of details and how to do outreach. So we recommended that the Planning and Development Department work closely with the Rent Stabilization Board and Program, Health, Housing, and Community Services Department in the Berkeley Unified School District to develop and implement an effective targeted outreach program to reach all tenants and all the property owners of the 3,795 rental housing units in the Adeline Corridor. And we suggested that, they consider the rent board maintains a database of property owners of rent-stabilized units in the target area, which will be a great value in the development and implementation of an outreach program. And I think that was important to indicate. And then we have a couple of news articles. I think they speak for themselves. Commissioner Treyger, would you like to speak about any of the articles that you presented?
I think they speak for themselves as well. And I, for one, am intently watching the subject of article number 16 because this is potentially precedent-setting and can impact a number of jurisdictions, including ours.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, seeing that, we'll go to section number 8, committee board meeting updates and announcements. So we start out with the Budget and Personnel Committee meeting.
So Budget and Personnel, we met earlier today to recommend the staff recommendation that was later passed on consent. We will be meeting again, it looks like 6 p.m. Prior to the September meeting. So I think the time worked well for all of us. And so that will be our next meeting.
Thank you very much. Do we have an update on the eviction Section 8 and foreclosure? Commissioner Poblet is not here, so we'll move on to the Habitable and Sustainable Housing Committee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the biggest takeaway from our meeting is how we can basically green our apartments. The biggest challenge comes to how we can work with both tenants and property owners in regards to how we can do that. Most of the time, some of the changes, whether it's electrification, dishwashers, what's the other one? Oh, EV charging stations. It does ultimately have to revisit a lot of the original signed lease agreements. This is a call out for property owners representatives, and experts to basically, it would be a great way for you to engage the committee on what you think would be the best way to greenify our apartments. So I do want to thank Commissioner Treyger for taking a leadership on a lot of these items. I, for one, am pushing for dishwashers. That's the item that I'm working on, but I know you've been working very hard. And I do want to say in regards to EV charging stations, the state rebate is almost close to paying for, along with certain tax exemptions. I understand that federally a lot of it has been taken away, and I do apologize for that. But I certainly hope that we will experience those as well in the future. So I want to just make sure that I empower everybody to do that.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Simon Weisberg, an update on the IRA, AGA, and Registration Committee.
So obviously, we all voted on some of the regulation changes, and I just want to thank my committee members for, we had a special meeting to be able to, keep that agenda moving. And I think there's supposed to be additional, I believe, we have some additional regulations that we'll be proposing in the fall and reviewing.
Great, thank you very much. Outreach, anything?
We will be convening next month.
Great. So an update on the 4x4 Joint Committee on Housing. So our next meeting is September 25th. And one of the things that we had looked on back in June was a fair chance housing was for returning citizens so they won't be from prison, so they won't be discriminated against. So we looked at some proposals. The language is still being worked on, but I believe it's going to be presented actually at a city council meeting sometime in September. So it's an opportunity to make sure that people who have served their time and are now free and coming back into the community to be able to have housing without discrimination. Could
the chair say the expected date again?
Well,
Neither 9/25.
well, we're 9/25, September 25th is the 4x4 committee meeting. On the ad hoc committee on technology and issues?
Thank you. I do want to thank our staff member, Amy, for all your hard work. I know that once when we have more information, you'll get back to us. I do want to just state that this issue is not on the rent board's part. Our staff member has been working very, very, very hard. So I want to thank you again, Amy. And once we hear back, we will find out what happens.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Thank you, Amy. We know that the ad hoc committee to fill the vacancy, we've now agreed upon how we're going to determine who the new commissioner will be, how we're going to pick them, and in what order they're going to present themselves. So that's very exciting. And seeing that we're going to adjourn in memory of if you remind me of Ms. Hazard's name.
Molly Hazen.
Hazen. We're going to also adjourn in honor of the victims of all the violence and Gilroy and all the shootings that have been happening across the country, which is so horrible. And also, Commissioner Chang, you mentioned somebody?
Donald Lee Warren from South Berkeley.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have a second on the adjournment?
Second.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, I managed to, this is sort of my fault for it, right? I just wish that it's more of a
What? Yeah?
You like that?
You know what?
I'm not a white wine drinker.
I don't drink many whites, but when it's hot out like this, sometimes I put a bottle of white in the refrigerator.
Planned obsolescence is what I say.
Yeah, I was gonna
No breeze.
put it in anyway.
Cut sharp.
I just,
Another,
it's
from another place
I
on Sunday.
find, now I
And
have
then
to
after that, following weekend, we do the routine, or the Viognier. Then I should be done.
Oh, reminder to all commissioners to please remove your trash after yourself. Thank you.
But I'm planning on.
Yeah.
John, say. Listen to your, listen.
All right.
Appreciate you, man.
We gotta work this out. You guys can't scream at each other.
I hope to God I don't get arrested on my way home because I have an application.
Yeah. She told us she was.
Good seeing you. How are we doing? Steadily.
Yeah, it's so long. Really bad. It's, you know.
Yeah. I guess summer is
Yeah, I mean,
there's like a best time, but
well, for me, I mean, a lot of the policy, I mean, obviously, we're going to get a lot of policy happening, and then I can send John and Hannah and. Well, I sent them off because I didn't want to, it's hard to have a kid around and like to move around all the time.
Thank you, Christine.